everybody, welcome back to the channel and happy National Train Day. We're headed south for said occasion to Tampa to see what we can find in the area, but we're actually going to end up on the Brooksville sub for a very special movement heading south this day. But until then, we're going to be in Tampa around sunrise, waiting for an ice-cold shipment of orange juice. It's 6:36 a.m. and we're set up in Sutton Siding, just a couple miles south of Tampa's Yeoman Yard, where our train L700 has originated out of and is now departing. 700 has been lined into the siding here, as a pre-dawn local is somewhere out there on the line south of East Tampa, all dark territory. So the JF dispatcher has set up a meet here in Sutton for 700 to get out of the way for the local, and then to get track control all the way to the bottom of the line at Bradenton and Tropicana. In a couple minutes, 700 shows his face with an interesting engine pair out of the engine shops at Tampa. Leading the train into the siding would be Biodiesel 7268, a very familiar face in this area, with an EMD SD70 Mace trailing second, number 4586. If this pair makes it up to Brooksville, I'll be sure to try and catch it, as an SD70 on Tampa locals is not something seen often, especially on Bone Valley trains or final mile deliveries like these. From Sutton, we'd start making our way south on 41, as 700 slowly came to a stop at the south end of the siding. He'd be there for a bit, as that local, L783, was still wrapping up his duties at Big Bend. According to dispatch, 783 had left Tampa around 2:30 this morning and was now ready to come back almost 5 hours later at 07:15. That would give us plenty of time to continue south on US 41 for a couple more miles to Gibsonton and the Alafia River there. We'd arrive well ahead of the train, and setting up off of Pennsylvania Avenue, I'd soon hear over the radio L783 reaching out to the bridge tender at the Alafia to get permission across the bridge once it was lined and locked. About 5 minutes pass, and with the interlocked bridge signal now green for 783, our train would emerge from the wooded area around Big Bend, crossing Bull Creek on the south side of town, before finally reaching us at 7:32 a.m. .783's quick passing would soon open up the line for 700, so back south on 41 we'd drive to Big Bend, and the first crossing south of the siding that the spur to the power plant, grain mill, and several customers breaks out of. Reminiscent of installations of the Bone Valley, Big Bend also has their own remote-powered signaled switches, said signal not dispatcher-controlled, but simply there to indicate the position of the switch. 700 would soon line and lock it in place for their southbound movement, now with a full head of steam heading south at track speed, passing underneath the dozens of high-voltage power lines stretching out east from the power plant into Hillsborough County. From Big Bend, we'd make a wide swing north onto the Clearwater sub at grabbing breakfast from a small bodega on 50th Street. On these hot summer-like mornings, it always feels right to start the morning with a breakfast sandwich and a café con leche, along with some Spanish hospitality. That would all be cut short, though, as meeting up with my good friend Dakota, we'd hear Y150 leaving Tampa for Drew Park with 2 engines and a long string of autoracks for North Tampa's TDSI ramp. We'd decide on the approach signal to TN interlocking just up the hill from the Diamond at TN as our photo spot. It's not every day that CSX sends an autorack train up this time of day, around 9:30 a.m. now, especially with this consist, 2 Jeeps and over 50 loaded racks. Seaboard's approach signal here is getting some new company, as 2 new houses are being constructed right next door, with the chaos of that only adding to this loaded shot, as Y150 notches up his 2 rebuilt Jeeps to bring the train out of Ybor City and north towards Sulphur Springs. I'm guessing L755 and 782 didn't run the day prior, as this Y150 would end up being an extra job today, as 755 would still end up running later in the day and returning just a couple hours later behind the 150. As Y150 climbed the hill here, he'd get a message from the Yeoman Yardmaster, still in radio range, telling him to give up his authority from Tampa to Sulphur Springs, as a crew was currently heading north to Brooksville to pick up a train from this week's Thursday run that evidently never returned. Remember, Sulphur Springs is the junction where the Clearwater sub turns west on the old Tampa and Gulf Coast towards the Gulf, and the Tampa Northers line to Brooksville, now the Brooksville sub. I had no idea how far or close the crew was, but I'd hop on Highway 589, the Veterans, to drive straight north to Cortez Boulevard and Brooksville. In 40 minutes, we'd be pulling off at Cobb Road and the entrance to CSX's giant facility and mine here to the north of town, and the location of the stranded train. With scrap and lots of cement to bring back to Tampa this morning, this is L78108, Thursday night's turn job that was mandated to tie down here as the crew ran out of time. Now 2 days later, we'd get here just 5 minutes ahead of the crew bus in preparation to chase this train home to Lutz. I'd introduce myself to the crew and we talked for a couple minutes before they'd board the train and get the 2 old Dash 8 locomotives ready for the 50-mile trip to Tampa. Although there's about a half dozen online customers still in operation on the Brooksville sub, SEMX is the heartbeat of the line, receiving anywhere from 20 to 50 cars a week. There's not much out here, but I guess people need their cement and concrete, which has kept SEMX in business for so long, and from the looks of it, that's not changing anytime soon. After telling me it'd be about 15 minutes until departure, the engineer's last words to me before getting into the 7801 would be, take as many pictures as you'd like, and we'd do exactly that, starting in downtown Brooksville. Built by the seaboard in the late 1950s, Brooksville is one of the few small seaboard towns that still has their old yard office and crew base and in operation. At one point, the line out of Brooksville would continue all the way to Seaboard Cedar Key branch at Archer via Inverness, Hernando, and Denellen. Rock out of the mines and from the aptly named Rock Yard would be shipped north to Baldwin and south to Tampa, utilizing crews that were all based in Brooksville. Unit coal and aggregate trains from Tampa would still have their Tampa-based crews, although even those trains would come to a stop here in downtown to grab paperwork and instructions from the ground personnel here. Back in its seaboard days, this is what this scene looked like, from the vantage on South Broad Street. With the SAL's depot on the right and house tracks for cabooses and local power, the SR 797 milepost was once a pretty busy place, now a vacant field with almost unnoticeable reminders of its history. Walking down to the east side of the overpass, history still remains underneath your feet, with Broad Street's 1936 built overpass, originally built over the main line and house track, funded by the seaboard. It's sad to see how much this scene has changed, with so many different railroad support buildings and businesses now long gone. But the fact that we'd be able to catch a daylight move through here is a reason enough to be happy and very grateful. At 11:22 a.m., L781 would show his vintage face along with a couple of very nice area rail fans, Jason and his son Dylan. It was great meeting you two up here, and I'm glad that all the waiting paid off for this catch. It's going down as one of my favorites ever.
To see it though.
I'd bid farewell to my two new friends and start the chase south by accessing US 41, where the speed limit is double the railroad's. I'd have a handful of shots planned out, with the next one being just north of the 806 milepost spur and Commerce Park at the golf course at Ayers, just north of Maseric Town. Named after the first Czechoslovakian president, Thomas Maseric, the town was founded in 1924 by 61 European immigrants who had fled to Florida during World War I. 60 of them were Slovak and one was Czech, together creating the Hernando Plantation Company, selling shares at $1,000 apiece along with 20 acres of land. The center of the town has always been Cafe Maseric, which ironically serves very good Cuban food now, surrounded by street names east to west named after Slovak national leaders and American presidents north to south. I wouldn't have enough time to stop here today, however, as I'd quickly set up at Garden Grove next to the Brevard Golf Club. Here the tracks dip in and out of Ayers Valley and climb back into Maseric Town through a lush tree tunnel down the tracks. Definitely a bucket list shot on this for me, and one that I'm proud to say I pulled off, with a pair of some of CSX's finest GE wide cab variants. Here around that 806 milepost, 781 would be doing a good 30 on this old Tampa Northern main line as he approached Spring Hill and soon 5A. I misspoke in my last video from this area, calling it 5A, not 5A, as the first 3 letters of the name are an homage to the 5 men who created the infrastructure around here, whose last names all started with the letter A, 5A. 6 miles to the south and a crossing of the subdivision of US 41 would lead us to the north side of 5A at Lucier Lane. Another spot familiarized in the aforementioned chase of that W001 from January, Lucier is a dirt path seldom used by anyone other than the homeowners down this dusty path that happens to parallel the tracks here for about a mile with just feet of ballast and grass between. I'd set up next to the car here as 781 crosses the first turn that Lucier takes, which brings it onto the west side of the tracks, as my brother would get behind the wheel for this fun pacing shot that even the crew would enjoy. We're on the engineer's side for this shot as he notches the train up towards the crossing of State Road 52 and the original end of this subdivision south of Brooksville at 5A.
Back on the chase.
The traffic patterns and road layout here would make it pretty easy to get back onto 41, now about a mile east of the tracks, as we drive into the northern portion of Land O'Lakes. To many people, this is the crossing at Tower Road, but for railroaders and older folks, this is Drexel, where the old Orange Belt, later ACL, crossed this sub on its way from Sanford to St. Petersburg. It's now a gravel road, with barely any remnants of an old main line and an at-grade interlocking. Looking north on the SR line towards Brooksville, however, there's still a couple of old concrete signal bases in the ground, similar to constructions in Haines City, Ybor City, and Sulphur Springs. I guess this was at one point a signal diamond, now hosting a small memorial for a late member of this area's historical society, who obviously had some ties to the railroad and its lavish history. This has to be one of the most peaceful spots on this line, where one can wait quietly amidst the cool breeze that carries itself over the flat plains that make up so much of this farmland around here, sprawling for miles before meeting the forest of pines and elderly oaks in a gradient that makes up for a uniquely Florida scene here. South one more spot on 41 we'd go, as I plan to beat the train to Lutz, framing the train with the Lutz Depot, a spot that I really don't think I'll ever get tired of. We'd race the train through Land O'Lakes, making it to the depot with about 2 minutes to spare as I'd set up for my last shot of this unforgettable chase. Now just 12 minutes from the home at the depot, I'd call it a day here, as it was nearing 1 o'clock and lunchtime for me and my brother. But just 5 days earlier, I'd be back out here in Lutz for CSX's Tuesday night L781 with more stellar power and a consist I wouldn't ever think of seeing just a few months ago. So back to Hannah Road on the outskirts of University we'd go just before 9 p.m. this night, as L781 would roll north with an SD40-3 leader leading another Dash 8 out of the Tampa power pool. At 9:01 p.m. the chase would begin, as 781 would roll out of the shadows and into the Lake DTC block, exiting the Sulphur Springs yard limits at milepost SR 834. It would be an easy game of leapfrog from here, as 41 at this time is usually fairly open, tonight being no exception. Through Lutz we'd go, pulling off at another favorite spot, the church at Lake Hobbs. With a bright LED streetlight and open parking lot just 50 feet from the tracks, Lake Hobbs is one of the best spots in Lutz to see a train in solid lighting after dark, and the preferred spot for tonight's festivities. Into Land O'Lakes we'd go. We'd be right on L781's tail as we'd follow him to Pasco Iron and Metal. A quick stop for tonight's crew. 3 empties would be bound for the spur tonight with no pickups. So uncoupling from their train on the main line, the two 6-axles would push into the spur with these 3 empties just before having the conductor tie down the handbrakes and uncoupling, leaving the drop-offs with the customer. From here, the engineer would bring his train north past the switch and have it lined back for the main in order to recouple the rest of his train and build up air pressure for the 19-mile commute to the next customer at SR 806. This is where we'd say goodnight to 781, heading back home a little bit before 10 p.m. this night, but with plenty of good footage to show for it. This wraps up my little library of 781 catches from the past couple weeks, and this video as a whole. I really hope you all enjoyed this one, as much as I enjoyed editing and filming it around town. But until we meet again somewhere out there trackside, this is Christian from Multicolor Films. End of transmission.